a reclusive billionaire with a stutter and a shattered heart. A fearless photographer who sees beauty in broken things. When Julian Reed meets Emilia Clarke at a high society gala, their worlds collide in the most unexpected way. But love isn't easy. Not when power, lies, and betrayal threaten everything. What made her walk away in the rain, leaving only a letter and a pendant behind? And what made him risk everything to find her again? This isn't just a love story, it's a fight for truth, for healing, for forever. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe to hear the full story. Thunder rolled across the Manhattan skyline, rattling the tall windows of Reed Innovations Tower. From the top floor, Julian Reed stood alone in his office, staring at a heavy, cream-colored envelope resting on the corner of his antique desk. It bore the gold-embossed seal of the Museum of Modern History, a personal invitation to that evening's charity gala. His name was printed at the top in elegant script, Julian S. Reed, benefactor, as if it belonged to someone else. At 33, Julian was one of the most powerful and elusive figures in New York's tech and philanthropic circles. A billionaire who built empires with quiet precision. Yet despite all his accolades, his heart remained as untouched as the fresh snowfall blanketing Central Park. He exhaled, dragging a trembling hand through his neatly combed dark hair. Outside, lightning forked through the clouds, illuminating the minimalist interior. Persian carpets, polished mahogany shelves, a desk so precisely organized it looked untouched. It was immaculate, impersonal, like Julian himself. There were no photos on the walls, no hint of who he was beyond the press releases and Forbes profiles. Only the steady tick of a grandfather clock and the low hum of rain tapping the windows filled the silence. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion, a strong jaw set in quiet tension, and lips that had forgotten how to smile naturally. It wasn't fear that gripped him about attending the gala. It was the performance. Every handshake, every carefully practiced smile, every encounter with eligible heiresses thrust in his direction by well-meaning social strategists. All of it felt like drowning in expectations. And tonight, it would be worse. His mother had already left 3 voicemails about seating arrangements and reminded him twice to speak with the daughter of the Hanover banking family. Apparently, she had a master's in finance and a very elegant neck. The intercom crackled. "Mr. Reed," came the smooth, maternal voice of his assistant, Celeste. "The board meeting has been moved up to 5. Also, your mother's assistant called again. She says it's urgent." Julian closed his eyes and sighed. Of course she did. With a stiff nod to no one, he turned from the window, grabbed the invitation, and tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. As he passed through the hallway, his footsteps softened against the marble floors, but his thoughts raced. He remembered the debutante ball, where he hid in a storage closet for an hour because he couldn't manage a conversation without stammering. The tech fundraiser, where he misread a bidding paddle signal and bought a 19th-century globe for $1.2 million just to escape the gaze of the stunning gallery curator. He was the man who could dismantle corporate mergers with a word, but ask him to make small talk with a woman. And he crumbled. In the conference room, 12 board members sat stiffly as Julian entered. But here, among spreadsheets and quarterly forecasts, he was king. "The Madeira acquisition is at risk," he said, his voice steady despite his pulse. For the next 2 hours, he dismantled objections, negotiated revised terms, and saved the deal with the same cold brilliance that had made Reed Innovations a titan. His CFO, Clarke, lingered after the room emptied. "You saved another one, Julian," he said with quiet respect. "But even the best engines need fuel. You can't keep running on work and solitude." Julian tried to smile. "The company's thriving. That's what matters." Clarke studied him. "Your heart matters too." Later, in his private elevator, Julian rose to the top level, his sanctuary. The doors opened into a lush rooftop garden encased in glass, glowing under the storm's fading light. Herbs, orchids, and wild roses flourished in ceramic pots and raised beds. He walked slowly among them, fingertips brushing lavender stalks. Here, he could breathe. Here, he wasn't the ice king of Wall Street. A soft ping from his phone broke the peace, a text from his mother. "Speak to Miss Hanover. Wear the navy tie. It photographs well." He dropped the phone onto a bench with more force than necessary. As he knelt beside a white orchid, a flash of gold caught his eye. The gala's guest list, still open on his tablet. One name jumped out. Amaya Clark, event photographer. He didn't know her. But the name stirred something deep inside him, like a memory he hadn't lived yet. Outside, the storm was finally easing. Julian stood alone in the garden, unaware that by this time tomorrow, his world, carefully constructed, rigidly controlled, would be shattered not by scandal, not by disaster, but by the unexpected kindness of a woman who saw through his silence. The Museum of Modern History glowed beneath the evening sky like a temple of marble and light. Inside its cavernous halls, the city's elite flowed in waves of silk and velvet, diamonds catching candlelight as chamber music threaded through the air. Amaya Clark adjusted the settings on her camera with calm precision, the black strap snug around her shoulder, her fingers moving like a pianist's across the body of her well-worn Nikon. Her mother's borrowed gown, midnight blue silk with delicate beadwork at the collar, fit her perfectly, highlighting her deep brown skin and tall, willowy figure. She didn't need the dress to stand out, but she wore it anyway, a quiet promise to her mother who had whispered, "Walk in there like you belong, baby girl," before she left the boutique that afternoon. This was Amaya's biggest commission to date, photographing the annual gala that raised millions for underfunded arts programs in the city. It was a place where fortunes were made, alliances brokered, and images curated for society pages. But while others posed and preened, Amaya searched for authenticity. Through her lens, she found it in the small gestures, the way a debutante fidgeted with her bracelet, an older couple exchanging a private joke in the corner, a stoic CEO smiling only when speaking to his daughter. She was in her element, watching, capturing, revealing. She was adjusting her angle near the Egyptian exhibit when she felt the air shift. A hush fell around the grand staircase as someone entered. Amaya raised her camera out of instinct and peered through the viewfinder. There he was, Julian Reed. Even without the press photos and whispered introductions, she would have known it was him. There was something unmistakable about the way he moved. Precise, controlled, like every inch of him was holding in a storm. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, but it wasn't the fit that drew her attention. It was his eyes, icy blue and searching, as if he were looking for something he hadn't named yet. She lowered her camera and watched as he navigated the room. Despite the crowd, no one touched him. He moved like a shadow through chandeliers and laughter, nodding when necessary, but never lingering. Amaya recognized the technique. She used it herself when she wanted to disappear, to work invisibly while still capturing everything. But there was something more in his posture, something deeply familiar. It wasn't detachment, it was protection. She turned, preparing to capture the orchestra warming up, when a sudden wave of guests backed into her. Her heel caught on the hem of her dress, and her camera slipped from her grip. She gasped, but before it could crash to the floor, strong hands caught it midair, and then they caught her. She looked up, her breath stalling in her throat. Julian Reed. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. His touch was steady, but his expression was anything but. Up close, he was striking. Not the remote icon splashed across business magazines, but a man with freckles scattered faintly across the bridge of his nose and eyes filled with nervous energy. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. He blinked, visibly struggling with words. It's all right, your camera, it's safe. He handed it back, their fingers brushing. Thank you, she replied softly. You may have just saved my career. That made him smile, the smallest tug at the corner of his lips, as if the weight of 100 expectations had briefly lifted. You're the photographer, he said, his voice lower now, a touch less hesitant. I saw your series, the one at the children's hospital. It was remarkable. Amaya blinked. You saw that? She hadn't expected him to even know her name. I review everything that matters, he said, then seemed startled by his own candor. Before she could reply, a woman in red swept between them with a flourish, laying a manicured hand on Julian's arm. Darling, they're asking for you. His gaze lingered on Amaya as he nodded and allowed himself to be led away. She watched him go, heart pounding. For the rest of the evening, her lens found him again and again. She captured the moment he knelt beside a wheelchair-bound boy and made him laugh. The way his hand hovered awkwardly over a champagne flute before deciding not to drink. The flicker of loneliness in his face when no one was looking. He was a man surrounded by brilliance, but dimmed by distance. Near midnight, as the crowd began to thin, Amaya returned to the Egyptian wing for one last shot. The massive stone pharaoh glowed under the spotlight, its silent gaze regal and unreadable. She was adjusting the frame when she sensed someone behind her. She glanced at her display screen and saw his reflection. "They believed photographs could steal a piece of your soul," Julian said quietly. She turned, surprised by his presence and the steadiness in his voice. "And what do you believe?" she asked. He looked at her then, fully, like a man shedding his armor. "I believe some souls recognize each other, even in a room full of strangers." Her breath caught. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire or the enigma, but the man. And something inside her reached back. The velvet night draped Central Park in quiet magic, broken only by laughter and music floating from the circus tents that had transformed the green into a world of wonder. Chandeliers sparkled from pavilion peaks, casting golden shadows over the manicured lawns. Servers dressed as woodland fae glided through the crowd offering champagne, while aerial performers twirled above like living stardust. But Julian Reed stood just outside the spectacle, beneath the wide branches of an ancient oak, his hand resting nervously against the inside of his jacket. Hidden in the satin lining was a small velvet box, and inside it, a pendant shaped like a vintage camera, silver with tiny rose engravings. It had caught his eye in an antique shop weeks ago, and he hadn't stopped thinking about Amaya Clark since. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the way she looked at him like she saw past everything, or how effortlessly she made him feel. Real, not curated, not constructed, just Julian. Celeste appeared beside him, holding her tablet with the elegance of someone who had long mastered both grace and discretion. "Miss Clark arrived 15 minutes ago," she said, her tone soft. "She's photographing the aerialists near the main ring." She paused. "She's wearing burgundy silk." Julian nodded, pulse hammering, and stepped into the glowing chaos of the circus. The crowd ebbed and flowed around him, and twice he spotted women in burgundy. Both times, not Amaya. The second, a socialite named Elise Palmer, tried to engage him in flirtation before he stammered an apology and excused himself, crimson with embarrassment. By the time he reached the performer's entrance, he was rattled. The pendant in his pocket felt heavier than gold. Then he saw her. Not just the dress, not just the camera in hand. It was the way she moved, so fluidly through the energy of the night, calm and focused. She didn't just capture moments, she lived inside them. And somehow his world stilled as she turned and saw him. "I heard you were looking for me," she said, her smile teasing but warm. "Though apparently I've been mistaken for at least 3 other women tonight." Julian's ears flushed. No. He took a deep breath. "I wanted to give you something." She tilted her head as he produced the box and opened it to reveal the pendant. "It reminded me of you," he said, his voice low. "Your work, how you see the world, beauty in things most people overlook." Her breath caught as she traced the pendant with a fingertip. "Julian, this is exquisite," he swallowed. "Please, if I'm allowed to call you Amaya, then I'd like you to call me Julian." She smiled, radiant as moonlight. "Thank you, Julian. No one's ever given me something so thoughtful." As she turned, he stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, his fingers trembling slightly. She nodded and lifted her hair. His hands grazed the soft skin at the back of her neck as he fastened the chain. The touch lasted only seconds, but it undid him. He'd never known someone so elegant could be so real. They didn't speak for a long beat. The music of the circus swelled around them, bright and whimsical. But here in this quiet pocket of the garden, it felt like another universe. "Would you?" Julian began, then stopped. "Might I walk with you?" Amaya nodded. "I should be photographing the trapeze artists," she said, "but I think I can spare a moment, with the right company." Together, they wandered through the tents and lantern-lit paths. They talked, really talked. He told her about learning to cook in secret after business school, about feeling like an imposter in every room. She told him about growing up surrounded by music and secondhand books, about how light spoke louder to her than words. With every step their walls crumbled, and something new began to grow between them. Near the carousel tent, Amaya stopped. "You don't seem like the man I read about in the papers," she said. "Good," he answered. "Because I'm not." He glanced down at the pendant resting against her collarbone. It caught the circus lights and shimmered like it belonged to this moment. He offered his arm to help her across a patch of uneven ground, and she took it without hesitation. The warmth of her fingers through his sleeve sent a quiet jolt through him, like electricity and peace at once. In that moment, beneath the stars and sequins, with laughter echoing in the distance and possibility thick in the air, Julian realized he didn't feel awkward. He felt seen. He felt home. And Amaya? She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man who gave her art, who gave her light, who for the first time had made her believe that maybe love didn't have to come with conditions. Maybe it just was. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the arched windows of the Reed family estate, as if nature itself sensed the tension brewing behind the limestone walls. Julian stood at the foot of the grand staircase, his hand lightly resting on Amaya's lower back as they entered together. It was the first time he'd brought someone home in years, perhaps ever. Amaya, elegant in a tailored cream coat over her travel dress, wore the vintage camera pendant proudly against her chest. But beneath her calm expression, her heart pulsed with apprehension. The estate loomed around her, elegant, imposing, cold. Staff lined the halls with mechanical precision, each gaze polite yet distant. Winston, the butler who had served 3 generations of Reeds, greeted them with a bow that was both respectful and practiced. "Mr. Reed, Miss Clark, welcome." Julian nodded. "We'll be staying in the East Wing." There was a pause. "Of course, sir," Winston said, before adding, "Your mother awaits you in the drawing room." As they crossed the polished floors, Amaya whispered, "Is it just me, or do the walls feel like they're watching?" Julian gave a small, humorless smile. "They probably are. My mother had them trained." Vivian Reed appeared precisely when expected, descending the central staircase in a bone-colored suit with not a hair out of place, pearls resting along her collar like armor. Her eyes swept over Amaya, registering every detail in a second flat, then settled on her son. "Darling," she said, kissing both his cheeks. "We've prepared the guest quarters in the garden wing. Winston will show Miss Clark." "She'll be staying with me," Julian cut in, his tone firm. "We're not hiding this, Mother." Vivian's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes hardened. "Of course. How modern of you." The next few days passed like a chess match. Every breakfast was an interrogation in disguise, every lunch an ambush dressed in lace. Amaya answered every veiled jab with poise, but the air in the house was thick with judgment. Invitations to family meetings accidentally excluded her. Staff members hesitated to make eye contact. Still, Amaya remained unshaken. She moved with quiet dignity, winning the hearts of kitchen staff by learning their names, asking about their families, and once preparing her father's spiced French toast on a rainy morning. It was the first time Mrs. Langley, the family cook, smiled in the presence of a guest, but Vivian was far from finished. In the shadows of the estate, plans were forming. At a candlelit dinner one evening, Vivian mentioned a newly hired PR consultant, Lucas Harrow, and smiled a little too tightly as she said, "He'll be coordinating our wedding coverage." "We do expect a wedding, don't we?" Julian didn't answer, but his jaw flexed. The following morning, Amaya received an invitation to meet Vivian in the conservatory to discuss floral arrangements for the inevitable event. She arrived promptly, dressed in a flowing cream blouse and tailored pants, camera around her neck, but the glass-walled room was empty, save for the man waiting by the orchids. Lucas Harrow. His smile was sharp, his cologne heavy. "I thought we were discussing peonies," Amaya said coolly. "Change of plans." He stepped closer. She stepped back. "Mrs. That Reed wants what's best for her son," Lucas said smoothly. "And you, Miss Clark, are a complication." When he reached for her arm, her instincts took over. She twisted, slipped free, and elbowed him hard in the ribs. He stumbled, swearing, and Amaya fled. Behind her, she saw the red lights of new security cameras blinking, recording, framing the narrative. Back in her guest suite, her hands shaking, Amaya pulled out her travel bag. She could already picture how the footage would be edited. The timing, the closeness, the angle that suggested something shameful. If she stayed, she'd bring scandal. Not just to Julian, but to the Children's Art Foundation they were planning together. Everything they had built would burn in the media's furnace. She found paper and wrote by hand. "Julian, some loves are meant to be quiet sacrifices. Yours taught me what it means to be seen, to be known, to be loved without pretense. But your world has sharp edges, and I won't be the blade that cuts you down. I'm leaving because I love you, not because I don't believe in us, but because I believe too much. Keep the pendant, or don't. Either way, it carries a piece of me. Yours, Amaya. She placed the letter on his pillow, the pendant beside it. Then, taking only her camera and the truth in her heart, she slipped through the service door and into the rain, never once looking back. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Julian Reed stood frozen in his private study, her letter trembling in his hands, the ink already smudged by the weight of disbelief. Rain smeared down the windows in watery trails, matching the hollow ache forming in his chest. She was gone. Amaya had slipped from his life like breath on cold glass, vanishing with nothing but a note and the pendant he'd once given her. He read the letter again, slowly this time, each word slicing deeper than the last. Some loves are meant to be quiet sacrifices. He closed his eyes. No, not like this. A soft knock pulled him from the edge of the storm in his mind. Clara, the housekeeper, stood at the door, her expression pale but determined. "Sir, there's something I must show you." Downstairs, in the dim glow of the estate security office, she inserted a USB drive into the monitor. Footage flickered onto the screen, surveillance from the conservatory. Julian leaned forward, heart pounding as he watched Lucas Harrow's calculated steps toward Amaya, the way her body tensed the moment she twisted out of his grip and ran. But more than that, he saw the truth, her fear, her resistance, her integrity. There was no misinterpretation to be made, not if you had eyes and a soul. He turned to Clara, whose voice shook. "I heard them planning it. Your mother, Mr. Harrow. I should have said something earlier. I was afraid." "You've done more than enough," Julian said, voice gravel. "You've told the truth." Within the hour, his mother was removed from all operational authority. Legal papers, drawn up long ago by his late father as protection against internal sabotage, were enacted. Julian stood in front of the Board of Trustees, his voice calm but unyielding. "The foundation will continue, but it will do so without manipulation, without prejudice, and without my mother's hand controlling its vision." After that, he didn't waste time. Every contact, every private investigator, every connection he had, he activated them all with one goal: find her. He checked every gallery she'd worked with, every exhibition she'd been scheduled to shoot, every whisper of freelance jobs in Brooklyn or Harlem. Nothing. But he refused to give up. 3 weeks passed before the break came. Her father, a jazz musician with a voice like honeyed brass, answered the phone. Julian explained everything, not as a billionaire, but as a man heartbroken and finally awake. Silence stretched on the line before the voice responded, soft but firm. "She's in Brooklyn. She's been hurting. But if you mean what you say, go show her." Julian arrived at a small converted studio on a quiet corner, rain misting the windows. Inside, through the fogged glass, he saw her, alone, editing photographs, her expression far away. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. "We're closed for appointments," Amaya called, not looking up. "I'm not here for an appointment," he said. She froze, fingers hovering above her keyboard, before turning slowly. Julian stood there, slightly damp, slightly breathless, holding the vintage camera pendant in one hand and the memory card Clara had recovered in the other. "You came," she whispered. "I should never have let you leave," he replied. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have fought then." Her eyes were glassy. "I didn't want to make you choose." "I would have chosen you," he said. "Every time. But now I don't have to choose. My mother's gone. The truth is out, and I don't care about the scandal. I care about you. About us." She looked at the pendant in his hand, the one she had left behind like a severed part of herself. When he stepped closer and gently placed it around her neck again, she didn't resist. His fingers brushed her skin and settled the charm back to its home at her collarbone. "I kept something too," she said, reaching behind her monitor. A photograph, slightly bent at the edges, showed them in his rooftop garden, laughing beneath strings of fairy lights. It was joy, suspended in time. It reminded me that what we had was real. "It still is," Julian said softly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it's expected, not because it looks good on a magazine cover, for Matt, but because I'm in love with the woman who taught me how to live outside a spreadsheet. I want to spend my life creating something beautiful with you. Amaya stared at him and then down at the ring, a stone that shifted color like her photographs, always revealing new truths in new light. Yes, she said, tears spilling over. Yes, 1,000 times. As they embraced in that little studio, the world outside blurred. There were no titles, no legacy, no billion-dollar pressure. Just two people, finding their way back to each other. And as the pendant warmed against her skin once more, Amaya finally felt whole again. So did he. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about quiet bravery, about seeing someone's scars and loving them anyway. Julian and Amaya's journey reminds us that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. In a world obsessed with image, their story teaches us that the most meaningful connections happen when we take off the mask, when we risk the truth of who we are. Love that endures isn't built on status, wealth, or appearances. It's built on trust, forgiveness, and the courage to fight for one another when everything else falls apart. Amaya walked away not because she stopped loving Julian, but because she loved him enough to protect what mattered most to him. And Julian, in turn, became the man she believed he could be. That's the heart of real love, choosing each other even when the world tries to pull you apart, choosing to heal, to rebuild, and to write a future together with honesty and hope. So, if you're holding back, afraid to speak your truth, or thinking you're too broken to be loved, remember this story. Sometimes, the greatest kind of love is the one that sees you clearly and stays. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a little hope today. There are more stories coming your way. Stories of love, redemption, and the quiet courage that changes everything.